Our guest for this session is a great friend of the Dole Institute, our first fellow at the Dole Institute, Mr. Steven Jacques, who is a Democratic Communications Advisor. Steven, welcome to our virtual post-election conference.
Thanks so much, Bill. It's good to see you again.
Yeah, good to see you and glad to have you as part of this. We appreciate it. Let's start with a little bit of personal history, Steven. Tell us about, I know you've worked on a bunch of campaigns, but just kind of walk us through those kind of quickly.
Oh, as briefly as I can make it, I started in '74 in my first congressional campaign in Southwest Missouri. In '76, a Senate campaign for the legendary Congressman Jerry Linton in Missouri, and then joined the Carter staff for the general election in '76 and did advance on the national staff for Carter. And joined the White House staff in '78 as an assistant in the advance office for the vice president. And just every single, did the re-election in '80. I've worked basically every presidential election since then. Was John Kerry's senior national lead advance in 2004 and Barack Obama's in 2007, 2008 throughout the campaign. And that's the political experience, governmental experience, the White House staff, State Department, Commerce Department, Housing and Urban Development. So that's the political part of things.
Yeah, very good. Well, you definitely have done a lot of very interesting stuff. Let's go back to the beginning of the year. Give us your assessment of the Democratic race at the beginning of the year.
Well, obviously, no one saw Joe Biden coming. I mean, in everybody's view, it was a total toss-up at the beginning of the year. And no one saw that happening. It truly was Congressman, oh my gosh, I've forgotten his name, South Carolina, who revived his campaign, North Carolina, when Joe Biden came back after a dismal showing in the first few primaries, New Hampshire, Iowa caucuses, and won, it was North Carolina, Congressman Clyburn, and endorsed him. And after that, it was, he came roaring back, the money went to him, and it was only after that that he took on some momentum. So it was a surprise for everyone, and no one saw it coming. And then the COVID thing just threw a monkey wrench into everybody's plans, forced everyone to get more creative in that regard.
Right. Why do you feel that all the pundits had written off Biden right before that South Carolina primary?
Democrats, Republicans fall in line, and Democrats fall in love. They were looking for somebody to fall in love with on the Democrat side, and we look for people who have charisma, whatever that means in the larger sense. No one was feeling that. No one was feeling it from Biden being a rather low-key guy in many ways. I mean, he was not charismatic in the same sense that we view Obama or Clinton. And he's just a plotter in the best sense of the word. He just kept coming and kept coming and kept coming. But that's not something that captures people's attention, either Democratic operatives or voters or the media for that matter. That people look for someone who's a breakout star, and there were no breakout stars. And at that age, it became common wisdom that Joe Biden was written off. And when that starts to happen, it's very tough to start a new narrative unless you win dramatically as he did in North Carolina. So. The media, journalists are people too. They understand what's going on in terms of the general zeitgeist of the campaign, and they fall into that to some extent by looking to see who's exciting, who's breaking out. In this case, it didn't turn out to be that kind of a campaign.
Yeah, let's go over to the other side, Steven. Give us your assessment of the president's chances at the beginning of the year, before the pandemic and before Biden became the nominee.
Well, 2020 hindsight. Naturally, those of us of my political bent thought that he should be, whipped easily. Only in hindsight and seeing the number of votes that he got, he was obviously still quite potent at the beginning of the year. He may have actually won this election if it hadn't been for the coronavirus. And so as it turns out, he was stronger than Democrats hoped or feared. And we just assumed that everybody thinks like us, I suppose. Maybe that's my problem. But we didn't think he was very strong at the beginning of the year. We thought he was extremely vulnerable. So it turns out he probably wasn't that vulnerable. And, you know, the coronavirus kind of probably was the last nail in his coffin, so to speak, in terms of people's feelings about him. But
Yeah.
people's feelings were baked in. It was just remarkable how if you liked him, you liked him. If you didn't like him, you didn't like him. And that was all there was going to be said about it.
Yeah, that's a good assessment of it, I think. How did, just from an observer, a very informed and experienced observer, how did the campaigns adjust to the pandemic?
On the Democrat side, obviously, it was an evolution. I mean, they first had to figure out what to do, and it evolved. Same with entertainment television, late night television. People had to get more creative, and I think that was good in a way. It's interesting to see how people's creativity really took hold when they were forced into that situation. So the Biden campaign evolved essentially from, if you remember, he started in the basement on a laptop. They went to more outdoor events, you know, larger spread out events that, you know, not too many people. Remember, he went to Gettysburg and did an event there. They moved to like the car rallies, if you recall that. You never did a drive-in theater type car rallies. It was a great evolution of the campaign. Understanding, of course, that the visuals are the key thing in terms of what moves people. It's pictures and images are still the gold standard. And they were still creating some pretty good images, but it's remarkable to see the difference. People are still moved by the images to an extent that I always find amazing. When you hear Trump supporters say, well, Trump was getting huge crowds at his rallies, and did you see no one was showing up at the Biden rallies? Well, it just, the images to them told the story. Not as many people at Biden rallies, a lot of people at Trump rallies, and that told the story. It was, even though it was controlled, obviously, the Biden thing was, they were trying to be responsible. So they evolved into bigger and bigger things. It almost turned into the front porch campaigns. Remember historically from the late 1880s, 1890s, Garfield, Benjamin Harrison, most famously William McKinley did their front porch campaigns. And it evolved into something like that because they had a venue in Wilmington, Delaware that they used over and over again for Joe Biden to come out and make his comments, give his remarks, do his press conferences. And it was set up so they could just move to there. And I think it worked out fairly well for him, being not a youngster. I think the less grinding aspect of not having to go out and do 2 or 3 rallies a day plus multiple events, I think benefited him. Obviously, we saw what happened with the Trump side. They tried not to let the coronavirus affect them too much, but it cut down their number of rallies. But it's historically speaking, it's interesting to think McKinley in 1896 did his front porch campaign, and he was running against a very young William Jennings Bryan, who went out and did more than 600 speeches and events throughout that general election. He was out beating the bushes nationally, and McKinley was sitting in Canton, Ohio on his front porch, and he won. I find that to be an interesting analogy to today, where Trump was out beating the bushes as much as he could, and to a large extent, Joe Biden.
Yeah, I'd like your.
No, go
Sorry,
ahead.
go ahead. I'd like your assessment as a pro who's done hundreds of presidential events. The very first big kind of reopening event was the event that Trump had in Tulsa, and they expected tens of thousands of people, and I think barely 5,000 people showed up. What was your assessment of that?
I think in normal circumstances, that might be somewhat damaging to see those visuals. In this circumstance, it's such a flood, such an onslaught of information. I won't qualify that information, but an onslaught of stuff, information, activities, comments, tweets coming out of the White House that had blended into everything else. I mean, it was a one-day story, whereas in some campaigns, a fraction of the number of people showing up at an event would be a fairly major story. And it just blended into the cacophony of information coming out of the White House in various ways. And So I thought it had almost no effect. It was interesting as an
Right.
advanced person. We all kind of mused, all the advanced people mused at it, but I don't think it had much of an effect.
Well, one of the things that the parties had to do totally new and on the run was switch to virtual conventions. The Democrats decided on a virtual convention quite a bit before the Republicans. But what did you think about how both parties handled those?
Um, well, first of all, obviously disagreed with having the in-person conventions, and so I thought it was irresponsible to do as much in-person stuff as the Republicans did. That's my bias, but the Democrats, quite frankly, I was waiting kind of with bated breath to see how they would do, and I thought it was masterful. And I was, I'd be, me, I'd be willing to say if I thought it was less than masterful. I thought it was extremely masterful what they did. Very creative, very well choreographed, very well produced. The people that came on were wonderfully prepared, and the settings were great. It was just a well-produced show. And I hate to say, use the word show, that almost demeans it in a way, but they're shows, they're productions, and people perceive them in the same way that they perceive shows. I think that was a masterful work on their part, and I would tell you if I thought differently. It was wonderful. And I didn't think the Republicans, again, I didn't think their production gained them any votes, gained them any independent votes. I'm not sure it was very compelling in that regard. It basically sold to their base, and it did a good job in that regard. I mean, it was effective in maintaining their base. Obviously, Trump got 9 million more votes or something like that than he did last time. Pretty remarkable.
Yeah. Let's go into the campaign then, and I want to ask you about a few specific things that occurred, and then go on to the kind of the aftermath. Bob Woodward published Rage on September 15th, and Justice Ginsburg passed away 3 days later. How did those events affect the campaign?
I thought that Justice Ginsburg's death was probably the most meaningful in terms of generating motivation, enthusiasm on the part of Democrats, people who are likely to vote, wanted to vote, but maybe not as likely to vote. I thought that one event probably was more motivating than almost anything else that happened in the campaign. She was famous, that helps. She'd had the movie written about her, and she was obviously, it was all the adoration was well deserved, and that I think moved people. I think much more than most things in the campaign, and that went on for several days. Then when the president immediately nominated another Supreme Court justice, that compounded the issue for Democrats. I think that was probably the single most motivating factor of the campaign in terms of getting people off their butts to go vote. I don't know what kind of percentage, I haven't seen the data. I don't know what kind of percentage it led to, but if it was only 0.5%, something like that, or 1 or 2%, not much, but it's meaningful.
Mm-hmm. Give us your assessment of that first debate. That was one of the more unconventional presidential debates that many of us have witnessed.
Once again, it kind of blends into all the stuff that comes out of the White House. I mean, it is a conscious effort, I believe, from what I've read on the president's part, to just flood the airways with his comments about things. And to those of us on the Democrat side who are offended at that, we're always amazed that people can act like that, that a person can act like that, and people can not mind. So again, I saw the debate and saw it in a completely different way than Trump supporters saw the debate. I mean, in a normal circumstance, one would think that would be totally disqualifying for a candidate. That after that would be downhill the rest of the way. But we've been thinking that ever since the presidential candidate Trump said that he liked, that John McCain was a loser. That he didn't like, he didn't think he was a hero. He thought the heroes were the people that didn't get captured. Well, all of us thought that would be the end. And that was obviously 1 million years ago. And those things just all kind of blend in. And that debate performance was horrendous, I thought. But the next day, it's the next day's news. I mean, it's just that fast for this White House because they flood the airways with information, with stuff, with comments.
What was your assessment of the final debate?
I think Joe, the president-elect, pardon me, really showed his, again, I go for emotion. I mean, people vote on emotion. People don't vote on issues. I'm very certain about that. I've seen the data for years. The vice president at that point created a better emotion in terms of his persona, his calm demeanor, which he did at the first debate as well. So not looking so much at substance, but looking at the feelings that come out of those debates. How did I feel about that guy? I thought it was a home run for Vice President Biden at that point. But again, the next day, it's just so much of we're inundated with comments, with tweets, that the next day it's forgotten. It's short attention span theater.
Well, the president-elect went into election day, and I believe the Real Clear Politics national polling average showed him with about an 8-point lead, and most of the states showed him in good shape. And the election wound up being a lot closer than people expected. Why do you think that was the case?
People are blaming the polls, that somehow the polling is off, and I'd have to go with that. If they're not asking the right questions, if people who support the current president don't want to speak up, somehow, and it was flawed the last time, obviously, they got it wrong in 2016, they got it wrong this time in a general sense. Obviously the polling, their techniques, their science is not picking up what they're supposed to be picking up. And I think it's just that basic. If you don't ask the right questions, you're not going to get the right answers. Somehow they're not picking up that latent support that's not speaking up about the president in this case. And in the future, probably it's going to happen with other candidates as well. But this one was farther off. The polls this time and the last time were farther off than they've been historically, from what I can tell, going back to Truman and Dewey. Probably since then, they haven't been quite so bad. So there's something about Trump supporters that isn't being picked up in the polling. But I don't know what that is.
Right. Do you think the president-elect got a mandate?
It's all perception, my friend. It's all perception. 7 million more votes and the same number of landslide electoral votes that the president got last time could be painted as a mandate. But whether I'm not sure that perception means much in the long term. It's really going to boil down to the Senate and whether he can get support out of any kind of cooperation out of a Republican Senate, or whether they can win back those 2 seats in Georgia. I think that's going to have more meaning than the perception of a mandate, which is short-lived. They won't be able to show massive numbers of people showing up at the inauguration like Obama did. And those perceptions are important in a general sense. I'm not sure they mean much to McConnell. He's not going to feel the pressure of a general public mandate. And I'm not sure that it's not going to be perceived as such, because the Republicans, frankly, just do a very good job of messaging on that score. And Democrats aren't going to go down that road to any great extent to try to pursue that message. We have a mandate. They know it's bread and butter issues. What's going to happen with the Senate?
Right before the election, it was strongly possible that the Democrats could take control of the Senate, which is still technically possible with the runoffs in Georgia. But they also expected to pick up seats in the House, and they didn't. Did that surprise you?
Yeah, it surprised everybody, and I can only go with what the House leadership has said about why that occurred. I mean, it was, the last time around in 2018, it was much more motivation, enthusiasm for getting back a Democratic House, and the Trump issue was the presidential campaign wasn't happening, so the Trump votes weren't going to him. People weren't showing up to vote for Trump, and so that all compounded to make the enthusiasm level a little less this time around. for voting for Democrats in the House. I mean, nationally, we still have millions more votes, people who voted for Democratic candidates than voted for Republican candidates in the House. How they can translate that into actual more seats, whether they can turn it around for 2022 is going to be a good question. They need to battle. This is the big concern, is whether we're going to be aggressive enough, the Democrats, and their messaging to be a good competitor to Republicans who are good at this.
How do you think the president-elect is going to handle the tension in the Democratic Party between the progressives on the one hand and the party establishment?
I think he's already doing it to some extent. It's kind of interesting. I mean, it's progressives are heartfelt in their beliefs, and they don't back down very easily. Certainly that's symbolic now with some of his appointments, you know, Buttigieg at transportation and Marcia Fudge at housing and urban development. Some of the other appointments, they're trying, right now it's symbolic. He's certainly going to try to appoint sub-cabinet level people with a much broader, you know, a very diverse sub-cabinet level group that'll probably be more diverse than any previous administration. So I think he's going to try to show the numbers in that regard. I don't know what their plan is. I'm just thinking what they may be trying to do. Obviously, he has a lot of personal retail politics to do with progressives, talking to them on one-on-one, with groups, things like that, to make to bring them into the fold in terms of policies. I'm not sure that there's too many policy differences. You know, college tuition, things like that. I guess there's fairly major policy differences, but not huge. It's more the words that are being used. It's more the communication that's being used. And he has to convince progressives that he wants the same thing as they want, same things that they want, but he wants to use language that's going to be more acceptable to the masses. And you just don't do anything without the center in this country. And I think he's going to have to play the language game a little bit and ask them to come off. Like defund the police I happen to agree that it's a bad word. Defund, you don't defund the police. You do what the police have been asking for decades. I've worked with police for many, many years. And I've always heard them say, we're not social workers. You know, a lot of what we do doesn't require a gun and a badge. We're not social workers. We give them what they want. Give them some help and support in terms of social workers, healthcare professionals, mental professionals, to make their jobs so they can do their jobs better. Use that kind of language. And I'm not sure that they're too far separate in terms of policies. He just has to convince them of that. But you know, everybody who's got a computer has a speaker, a microphone to use, and can talk to the world, and they all do.
Yeah. Well, speak a little bit about that, Stephen, how social media and the 24/7 cable news have changed campaigns.
Oh my gosh. I remember in the early 90s, Hedrick Smith was an independent journalist talking about almost too much democracy because of the media. Now everybody has a voice. This is the early 90s he was talking about. You know, everybody has a platform. And he used the words too much democracy, and I got a kick out of that. You know, in the olden days, the parties were the voice of the political, the office holders. And the parties, obviously, for many decades haven't held that position as being the primary outreach vehicle for the Republicans and Democrats. And it's only compounded this time around. There's thousands of media outlets, thousands of opportunities to get your word out, and you're almost, again, back from the 90s, an over-communicated society. That's what we were talking about back then. We're being bombarded with over 5,000 marketing messages every single day of our lives in the mid-90s. I can't imagine what it is now. I haven't seen the research. So it does compound the issue to get a part of people's minds. And you have to be relentless, and you have to use images, and inflammatory language obviously works better because it gets more people's attention. And Democrats don't use that much inflammatory language. So it's tough to get when Democrats have to use complex, nuanced language to get their points across, and the people they're running against, you know, can use more blunt language. It doesn't help. So it compounds the problems. Now, as I said, Democrats this year, I think, have shown, in a general sense, the Biden campaign specifically, real professionalism in their media outreach, starting with the convention. They've just done a wonderful job in crafting the images and the messages that would work. Obviously, it worked well enough to get 7 million more votes than the sitting president. And I don't know, I've just been impressed. They've gotten more creative and they've gotten good at this. Now, I have to tell you that I was very encouraged in terms of our chances early on when the Lincoln Project came about. And we had Republicans, basically touting our side, promoting our side. I thought, well, now we've got a chance. What they did was spectacular. Great television ads, the money to put them where they needed to put them. Now I see that Steve Schmidt is converted, is changing over to being a Democrat, and he's going to continue his work. That gives me hope. These people are good at what they do. I hope, and as I said, this time around, Democrats have proven themselves to be better than what I worried they might be. And I hope that evolution of professionalism continues.
Let's shift gears a little bit, Stephen. You mentioned a little bit earlier the importance of visuals in a campaign. Can you go into a little bit of detail on what an advanced person does in a presidential campaign?
Advanced person, ultimately, the top of the tip of the pyramid, the place you're looking to achieve, the top of the mountain, I guess, is controlling that 15, 20, 30, 40 seconds of television coverage you're going to get for an event. You're lucky if you get that 30 seconds of coverage for an event. And that is, especially national news, it's critical. Very important in terms of the value of the financial value, the political value of creating those images. Advanced people are sent out 2, 3, 4 days, if you're lucky, in advance to set up all the events, but control everything and manage it in such a way that everything is then focused on that 30 seconds of TV that you want to get for the evening on the national news, and that's going to run 24 hours a day on the cable news. So you're looking to create a visual that will graphically explicate the message that the candidate or the president is going to give. And you want to sear it into people's minds with a good graphic image that tells the story in a picture. And that's what advanced people do. It isn't, yes, we do events. Yes, we do all the political coordination on the ground. It's all aimed at that controlling, basically creating a non-paid political ad on the evening news and on the local news, because most people still get most of their information from local news. So you're creating kind of a national network to some extent through local news outlets too, which has also become easier because a lot more local outlets are showing events that are happening in other cities because of the technology that's available today.
Well, as an experienced pro, what kinds of things did you see in this election that had to be done virtual that impressed you as being creative or clever or effective use of that particular format?
The virtual format. Well, actually, there wasn't a lot of virtual events going on, because everything that Biden did, certainly everything that Trump did, but everything that Biden did was live for tape or live. They didn't do virtual events, and that's in the sense. I mean, even from his basement, they weren't virtual. He was still a picture on a screen, and to most people, that's what counts. It didn't seem virtual to people. It was more the lower production, just the fewer number of bodies at these events. Not so many, they still had to have events. They still had to have television. They still had to have pictures, and Biden people were trying to do it responsibly. So it was more a question of how do you send out teams responsibly so they don't get COVID, and teams, that normally would hang out together and go to sites together and have countdown meetings together with their Secret Service counterparts. That was happening all very separate. Everybody, that if there was a team going to a site, the virtual stuff, actually, they were putting on events without having to go to sites to some extent, because they could go on virtual tours of the sites they were going to go see. And then by the time the vice president got there, then somebody would show up a little bit in advance and scope it out in person. So the virtual stuff, some of that change happened with virtual advance, not virtual events so much. Then when they did send out people for events, people were spending their time in their own hotel rooms. They're doing all their meetings by Google Meet. They're going to sites, in separate cars, separate rooms everywhere, no gatherings of any kind, no team building. They're able to see things happening on their iPhones in real time in terms of updates to press releases and schedules. So it was more the advance became virtual as opposed to the events, if that makes sense.
Yes. Okay. Looking forward to the next presidential campaign in 2024, do you anticipate that the campaigns will adopt some of the things that they've utilized during the pandemic, or do you expect campaigns to return to pretty much a normal approach?
No, I think they probably, again, I haven't spoken to anybody about this, but this had to cost them less money to do it this way than to put on these, send out large teams of people to do 2, 3, 4 events a day around the country. This had to be less expensive. They had to save money on this. I would expect they're going to integrate aspects of what they've created virtually because people are used to it now. Smaller events. I think they're going to go back to, just because people are people and you have to have events. I think it'll be a combination of both. They're going to go back to regular rallies. They like to see crowds. There's an old adage in advance that the big crowds make up for a lot of screw-ups. And so big crowds show enthusiasm. As I talked about earlier, people take the image of those crowds on TV as an indicator of actual support. I remember back in '72, some of the media were starting to believe that McGovern might have a chance because they were saying huge crowds, seeing us, at the end of the campaign for the last few weeks. Oh my gosh, he's really, this could happen for him. Well, the crowds really don't, but it's good for TV. So I think it's going to be a combination of both, for that matter. There'll be more regular events, more regular rallies. People love rallies. The campaigns love rallies. The candidates love rallies. It makes them more enthusiastic as well. They feed off those. So you'll see some of these aspects of the wonderful production, bringing people in, outside validators, I would think, could be brought into campaigns on a virtual level more often now. You can get a Tom Hanks to come and speak for you or somebody like that. You don't have to have them show up at your event. People are more used now to having people show up just like this.
Right. Do you think we're going to see a rematch in 2024?
I've been wrong so far about everything for the last 4 years. I mean, I used to think I was good at this. Ever since the era of Trump, I've realized I'm not. So I hate to predict. You would have to think that it's not. My feeling is it can't happen. The president has too many legal problems. He's going to be 4 years older. That's not meaningful, at that age. I think though he will. My comments would be political at this point, but I think he's going to still posture as if he's going to run because it's good for him. It's good for him to raise money. It's good for him to do his business. But I think he's got too many legal problems at this point, and he'll just be not willing to do it. He really, anyway, he doesn't seem like he's all that enthusiastic about doing the job now. I can't imagine why he'd want to come back other than just posture like he does. Mm-hmm. And from what I've read, he was a little bit surprised to win last time, that he really was just doing it, because he wanted to prop up his business, essentially, from what I've read. But I don't know. You can edit this part out, but I don't have a clue about 2024 other than that I can't imagine. But then again, I couldn't imagine that he would win in 2016. I couldn't imagine he'd win this time. And he came darn close this time. So my predictions are worth exactly what they cost you.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of us have been wrong about this guy from the beginning, Steven. So you're not the only one, amigo. There are a bunch of people in that boat. I have one final question. I want you to talk a little bit. You wrote a novel about politics a few years ago. I want you to talk a little bit about it. Is it still available on Amazon?
Oh, sure. Advance Man, presidential campaign adventure. That's based on true events in my 40-year history of doing advance that I've compiled into one book of fiction. And it's set during the 2008 campaign for a certain candidate for president back then and his senior national lead advance. And it's still available. It's on Amazon. It's called Advance Man. So, and I'm writing another one now that's all going to be nonfiction, just short stories of real stories from the road.
When do you hope to publish that?
I'm hoping next in the fall.
We'll have to have you back at the Dole Institute, hopefully in person. So keep us apprised of that.
Thank you. I will. I appreciate that.
All right. Steven Jacques, Democratic Communications Consultant, Advance Man Extraordinary. Thank you for your time today. We appreciate it very much.
Thanks, Bill. I appreciate it. It's good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you, Steven. Thanks to everybody who watched this session. Hope you enjoyed it. I'm sure you did. We appreciate your tuning in the Dole Institute Virtual Post-Election Conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you.